Okay, so these will be the classes. Today was supposed to be 4 hours, but it's going to be maybe a little bit shorter. Today, I would like to talk about the general principles of training and give some definition of the different words that we will use in the course of the class. And I would like also to introduce periodization, because this class will go really in depth about periodization. And we will start with the concepts of periodization in the history and how history, and especially the history of Soviet Union, influenced the concept of periodization. And many of the principles that we will introduce are still used now. We will then go into the periodization in recent updates. We know that, for example, COVID changed a lot in training. And we will discuss how the new sport environment affected the concept of periodization and how the athletes trains. Then we will go in depth about muscle hypertrophy. I hope that some of you is interested in that, because many athletes and gym goers are very focused on muscle hypertrophy. So we will start to talk about the principle of hypertrophy and then the methods to stimulate, to properly stimulate this characteristic, this adaptation. Then we will go in depth about training for maximal strength and power that is completely different compared to the focus on muscle hypertrophy and muscle mass. And then we will spend also a class on endurance exercise. Of course, my main research topic is resistance training, so we will spend more time about that topic compared to endurance, but we will try also to discuss this topic. Then on February 19, we will have the first exam on the first part of the course, and then we will switch to recovery over training for both strength and power athletes and also endurance athletes. I did some studies about recovery, and so I will talk about also from my experience, because we try to detect what were the most important parameter in order to assess if the subject had recovered or not. So if the recovery process was completed or not. And this is very connected to periodization, because in order to obtain the best adaptation to the training loads, it's important to wait at least that part of the recovery process happen. Because if the training loads are too close together, then the subject may not have enough time to recover, and something else than adaptation can occur, overreaching, overtraining. Okay, go ahead in the presentation, please. Okay, what is periodization? What is recovery? Because first of all, I would like to give the definition of that. For the term periodization, there are several different definitions. For example, Plisk and Stone in 2003 defined periodization as a planned distribution of training methods and variation on a cyclic periodic basis. In all the definition, for example, the one by Hoffman in 2012, periodization is a method for employing sequential or phasic alteration in the workload, training focus, and training task within the macrocycle, mesocycle, and annual training plan. In all the different definitions, there is the concept of variation of training workload, a cyclic distribution of the training workload. So you can already see some of the main principles of periodization. So periodization is considered a non-randomized order of training contents to obtain the best results in correspondence of the most important competition. That is the traditional Russian definition. In the next classes, we will see how Soviet Union gave important breakthrough into the periodization and the concept of periodization. So we can now respond to the question, what is periodization? Periodization is a sequential or phasic alteration in the workload, distribution of the training workload, and variation in the training load in order to obtain the best adaptation. This is basically periodization. What is recovery? Because recovery is connected to overtraining, and recovery is also connected to periodization. Recovery is an umbrella term, comprehensive of many modalities of recovery, such as regeneration and psychological recovery strategies. So recovery include the concept of regeneration that is typically referred as physiological regeneration, restoration of the physiological condition. But also from a psychological point of view, in the middle between periodization and recovery, go ahead, there is adaptation. Between periodization and recovery, there is adaptation. So periodization and recovery, the management of recovery and the periodization is the best way to optimize the adaptation process. And our entire course will be focused on trying to understand what is adaptation and how to properly stimulate adaptation. Because we have also always to keep in mind, you can go ahead, please, that adaptation is related also to adaptation and also to inflammation. We will try to define what is chronic inflammation and acute inflammation, what is good and what is bad. Okay, but what is the definition of overtraining and overreaching? When a subject didn't recover in 72 hours from the exercise, we can define that is in a condition of overreaching. Is an overreaching condition always bad? Of course not. Overreaching is the first brick of adaptation. So in order to obtain muscle gains, increase in maximal strength, sometimes it's very useful to obtain an overreaching condition. But what is overtraining? Overtraining can be obtained when the training contents, the training loads are too close one from each other, and there is not enough time to recover. Sometimes it's hard to detect an overtraining condition. We will see that there are some biomarker of overtraining. For example, when cortisol goes up and testosterone goes down, then some athletes may experience a condition of overtraining. But it's very hard to define a condition of overtraining without assessing performance. Are you understanding what I'm saying? These terms are already in your dictionary. You know already the meaning?
Both.
Nice. Awesome. So we can go ahead. What is strength? Because one of the main topics of this course will be strength. So strength is basically the ability of the neuromuscular system to produce tension. Strength is very important because from a certain point of view, also endurance is strength. Because in order to produce an endurance activity, the muscle can only produce tension. A lot of tension if maximal strength is required, low level of tension, but very long lasting, and then maybe an endurance performance. But strength is the ability of the neuromuscular system to produce tension. And in the possibility of producing strength by the muscle, we have always to keep in mind that then the neural system is very important. Because yes, maximal strength is related to muscle mass, but also to the ability of the neural system to recruit motor units to use properly the muscle. You can go ahead. What is endurance? Endurance usually include the whole body dynamic exercise that lasts more than 75 seconds. So when the exercise lasts for more than 75 seconds, we can talk about endurance. However, if you think about some resistance exercises for hypertrophy or for muscle strength, for muscle endurance, then the length of the set is going to be more than 75 seconds. So there are some elements of endurance also in resistance training. In order to keep working into a whole body dynamic exercise long lasting, we need to fight against fatigue. What is fatigue? If we think about fatigue with a single muscle fiber, then fatigue is a reduction in maximal force of an isolated muscle fiber induced by continuous electrical stimulation. So basically, we take a single muscle fiber from a muscle of a dead animal, a frog, usually a frog, and with electric energy, we stimulate muscle contraction at a certain point, the level of force that can be produced is not as elevated as before. This is fatigue. In Bologna, in downtown, Bologna is the city where I come from and where I live, and also where I teach at university. We have a big statue downtown of Galvani, that was one of the first scientists studying the possibility to make a dead muscle contract by electric energy. So Galvani studied the muscles of frog and was the first of the galvanism that also influenced the novels of the 19th century, the romantic novel. If you think about Frankenstein, the way Frankenstein was born was by a bolt with electric energy from a bolt that was connected to a dead body, and then Frankenstein was born again. So think about how science influences literature. It is very interesting. Fatigue, if we consider the whole body, the entire individual, is an acute impairment in performance that include both an increase in perceived effort. So basically, when you are fatigued, the same level of power produced, for example, on a cycle ergometer, increase the level of effort. The perceived effort, we will discuss about the rate of perceived exertion, RPE, that basically measure the level of effort. So the inability to maintain the same level of power or performance then is defined as fatigue during an endurance performance. You can go ahead, please. Okay, but from the point of view that we just highlight, there is a continuum from maximal strength to endurance, to the marathon. Why? Because the muscle can produce only tension. So if the tension is maximal, there is a big involvement of the neural system, then the strength will be very elevated. However, in order to run for more than 2 hours in the marathon, something else should happen. So at the top of this graph, we have Olympic lifting. Even if Olympic lifting are not exercise of pure maximal strength, because in order to lift a lot of weight in clean and jerk or snatch exercises, we need to produce a lot of power, more than maximal strength. We will define soon the different kind of strength. On the contrary, in order to run for more than 2 hours, we need to use different energy sources, because the amount of power that an individual can produce is related to the kind of source of energy, energetic mechanism that is using. Go ahead, because there is an animation. For example, in order to produce the highest level of power that an individual can obtain, the energy system that is used is always ATP-CP. So the energy source is the ATP that is already in the muscle and creatine, phosphocreatine. With this system, the power is the highest. However, this mechanism may support exercise only for a few seconds. So if we run, for example, 100 meters at full speed, after 6 to 7 seconds, we already have finished these energy sources. We cannot use anymore this energy system. And another energy system will be used. Go ahead. That is the glycolytic system. The power of the glycolytic system is lower compared to the anaerobic ATP-PCR system. However, this energetic system and this source of energy can maintain the exercise for longer. So, for example, if we run the 400 meters dash in track and field, this specialty is the most taxing for the glycolytic system. So at the end of this 400-meter run, we will have a lot of lactate within the bloodstream. Okay, but if a marathon runner is supposed to run 40 kilometers, his exercise cannot be sustained by the glycolytic system. And the aerobic system is going to be used. Okay, go ahead. What are the energy source for the aerobic system? Can you respond to this question? I'm sure you can.
Fats.
Fats,
and
not
carbs.
only fats.
And carbs.
Carbs and also
Protein.
Protein.
So basically, the aerobic system can use everything. If you are not doing anything, you are in quiet, you are still, then your body try to use always as much as it can the aerobic system. But when the exercise goes up in intensity, for example, I'm moving the table and etc., the aerobic system is not enough to support this level of effort, this level of intensity, and the other systems are used. Why the body try always to use the aerobic system? Because he has at least 8 kilos of fat that can support exercise for a very long time. Okay, go ahead, please. Okay, why strength training? Why we are so involved in strength training? Because the strength training has many benefits. Go ahead, please. So strength training, and now I'm very happy because the literature say that. So it's not only my opinion because I'm a resistance training enthusiast. However, the scientific literature say that with the resistance training, you can improve your level of strength. Of course, the muscle is the first target of strength training, but also bone may experience some improvement. Also, the quality of sleep. You can reduce the dementia. You can improve your cardiovascular system. You can reduce the incidence of cancer, depression. You can increase the strength of the tendons. So resistance exercise is very important, not only for athletes, but also for health. So go ahead. What is the difference between chronic inflammation and acute inflammation? When we perform exercise in the gym, for example, a classic damaging protocol for lower body muscle, for example, squat, and we perform 8 sets of 10 reps of squat, for example, with the centric phase, then we may experience muscle damage and then a lot of inflammation. This kind of inflammation that is mediated by many biomarkers like IL-6, interleukin 6, IL-7, IL-11, interleukin 11, tell us that something is going on. So there is inflammation following muscle damage. And in the subsequent days, adaptation will occur. So the protein synthesis goes up, and there is a fixing of these damages and a lot of protein synthesis. So basically the muscle is adapting to new requirement of the individual. However, if the level of the same markers like IL-6, IL-11 stay elevated for a long time, then the inflammation is not going to be acute, but is going to be chronic. And the adaptation following chronic inflammation is really bad because it's usually disease. And many of the chronic disease are influenced or caused by chronic inflammation. So there is a big difference between acute inflammation that may be good for adaptation following resistance exercise and the chronic adaptation. For example, some of the biomarker of chronic inflammation, such as CRF, are related to the way of life. So if you smoke a lot of cigarette every day, then your level of chronic inflammation is going to be elevated, and this level of inflammation will produce effects, negative effects on several organs and systems. Okay, please go ahead. Okay, so the literature say that with resistance exercise, we may reduce by 21% the overall risk of death. And this is crazy because resistance training has a huge effect on the quality of life, but also by the incidence of some disease. So vigorous exercise likely has antitumoral effects. And if we talk about, for example, American football player, basketball player, the stronger players are usually less prone to injury. So also for them, strength is very important. Go ahead, please. Cartilage. Higher, yes? You have a question?
Yeah, relating to the sport incidences of injury, is it the same for non-contact sports or only contact and collision sports?
Yes, it's the same for non-contact sport. Good question, because also in soccer, if your quad, but not only quad, also hamstring are not strong enough, and you don't have a good balance between the strength of knee extensor and flexor, then you are more prone to injury. Good. So I work with the Italian national team of field hockey, and the injury are very frequent, especially in the lower body. And we work a lot to compensate for the position that are typical of field hockey. So they use a stick, they have to be always bended forward in order to play with the ball. So we work a lot with we work a lot in the gym in order to compensate for this position, and we work mainly on strength of the core, of the muscle of the shoulders in order to compensate. What about cartilage? Because cartilage is a very interesting tissue. Cartilage has not direct blood flow, so there are no vessels in the cartilage, and all the metabolic substances and nutrients comes from the liquid that is inside the joint. So for the health of the cartilage, it's very important to alternate load and deload. And this happens when you perform exercise, for example, because when you pressure the hyaline cartilage, the liquid goes into the cartilage. And this is important in order to feed this tissue. If you have like a chronic inflammation that lasts for a long time, then the thickness of the cartilage could be reduced. Also, inactivity may reduce the thickness of the hyaline cartilage by 5 to 7%. However, exercise cannot increase the thickness of the cartilage, but may reduce the consumption of this tissue. When the hyaline cartilage is finished, then the only solution is a prosthetic device. So hyaline cartilage is very important. Okay, go ahead. But everybody knows that the mechanical load is functional in order to increase the mineralization of bone. So bone without weight-bearing exercises or mechanical load is going to reduce its bone density. And this may represent a problem, especially for old individuals. The most effective repetition exercises are typically performed at high intensity. So in order to stimulate the mineralization of the bone, heavy loads are required. So walking may not be enough. Okay, go ahead. What is really interesting is that if you reach a certain level of bone density when you are young, then you will be stronger in the bones when you are old. So it's important for young individuals to stimulate bone density with external loads in order by the point of view of health. Okay, stress fracture. Some of the athletes experience stress fracture, especially in the feet. However, this is more related to the not sufficient diet in terms of mineral, calories, protein, and the reduction in bone mass compared to the load that is applied to the bone. Okay, go ahead. Tendon. When the muscle increases size, then the tendon should increase its strength, because on the contrary, the muscle will break the tendon. When this happens, have you ever heard about some athletes that, for example, break the tendon of the pec muscles? This is typical in bodybuilder. Why?
Because he's cheating. He's using drugs.
Okay, they are using drugs, but
tendon is not strong enough.
Why some drugs increase the incidence of
because his muscle gets stronger faster, but the tendons cannot keep up.
Nice. So this is one of answer to the question. However, it really depends by the kind of drugs that you are taking. For example, there are some kind of testosterone that increase the that make you really cut. And the action of this kind of drugs is related also to the amount of water that you retain inside you. So you appear like really cut. So it's typically used by bodybuilder before competition, but also the tendon is gonna be dehydrated by this kind of drugs. And when the tendon is dehydrated, then is more prone to rupture. If you take other kind of testosterone, for example, the one that aromatized into female hormones, then you will not experience this kind of tear of tendon. Okay? Bene. Also for tendon health, recovery is very important. Okay, go ahead. Bene, kind of concentric contraction, I think you know already that. Concentric contraction, isometric contraction, eccentric contraction, I think you know that, so I'm not... Okay, so the effects of the different kind of training on muscle is the main topic of this class. Okay, go ahead. Bene, but strength is an umbrella term that includes several kinds of strength. So many kind of strength exist, and it's important to define properly the different typologies in order to speak the same language and use the same words. For example, go ahead. Maximal isometric strength is probably one of the most simple kind of strength to assess, because everybody that goes to the gym usually tests the 1RM. That is actually an expression, isometric, sorry. Isometric means that there is no movement. Heavy dynamic strength, I was talking about heavy dynamic strength, that is actually the 1RM in the gym, the 1 repetition maximum. You can go ahead, there is an animation. Go ahead, please. Fast dynamic strength, reactive strength, explosive strength. We will see the difference between this kind of strength. Go ahead. Okay, maximal isometric force is the maximal amount of force that can be produced by an individual without producing any movement. A typical way to assess this kind of strength is by using dynamometers or force plates. And actually the picture show one of the most popular way to assess maximal isometric force, that is the mid-thigh-pull test. Do you know that kind of assessment? So basically you put one force plate under the feet of the individual, and there is a barbell that cannot be moved. The subject push as fast as he can and strong as he can for 6 seconds, usually 2 to 6 seconds. And the force plate consent to measure peak force and also to build the force time curve. In this picture, there is a mistake. So the investigators that were performing this kind of assessment made a mistake. Can you find a mistake in this picture? Take a look at the guy in the picture. Okay, the position is fine. The barbell cannot be moved. It's fine. So there is a mistake.
Maybe it's related to
The height of the bar, maybe.
I hope that the height of the bar, they measure the joint angle of the hips and the knees. So
maybe it's because of the straps, him using the straps.
Maybe there is probably they could put in a better way the straps, but there is another mistake.
Are the feet too much wide? Are the feet too much wide?
No,
too
this
wide?
is correct.
I see no effort in this picture.
No effort, okay. They are using some earphone.
Ah, okay.
So probably the guy is listening to music.
Yeah.
Music is not allowed when maximal strength is assessed during an investigation. I remember Dr. Hoffman, anytime he come through the lab in Florida, he used to say, "No music in the lab." It was very funny.
Maybe they are checking the influence of music on
Maybe.
maximum strength.
If it
Maybe
was a
rock
study,
music.
yes. If it was a study about the influence of music, was correct.
But even still, because you need, as investigator, you need to say the performance to the individual, when to produce the force and when to stop. When you're seeing the first curve going down, you should tell the individual to stop producing force. So if he's using the headphones, he cannot hear you telling them when to stop. So your force time curve will be disrupted.
Yes, so was a mistake in the study. So if you say to a reviewer, so do you know how the process of publishing works? So basically we do the study, then we write a paper, we send to a journal, and the editor of the journal send the paper to the reviewer. And the reviewer read the paper and try to find all the mistakes. So if you say to the reviewer, "Oh yes, we used the music during the performance assessment," what did you do? Okay, reject the paper immediately. Why? Because music has an effect. A few years ago, we did a study about the influence of music on maximal strength and muscle endurance. What we found is that maximal strength was not affected by music. So the individuals didn't produce more force with music, but the number of repetition with the 70% of the 1 RM in bench press, for example, they were more when they were listening to music compared to no music condition. The problem is that in this kind of study, every time you use music, you need to use a specific kind of music that the individual likes, a specific tempo, a specific rhythm. So it's complicated to do research about music. Okay, go ahead. I'm gonna turn on the light. Okay, so the isometric maximum force, you can see in this graph. What is the name of this graph? Can you recognize it? Especially this portion of the curve.
Force velocity.
Yes, but what is the name of the individual that first published this graph? This is the Hill curve. Hill. Hill was a physiologist.
Archibald Vivian Hill was the researcher who also learned about lactic, what he thought was lactic acid in 1924.
Nice. And in 1936, he won the Nobel Prize because by isolating a single mass of fiber, he studied the relationship between velocity and force. That is actually this kind of hyperbolic relationship. At the top of the graph, when the line impacts the vertical axis, there is the maximum isometric force. So velocity is 0. As soon as velocity goes up, the amount of force goes down. But if we go in the left part of this figure, we see that the amount of force is still going up. So we can understand that eccentric force is even more elevated compared to both isometric and concentric force. So basically, the maximal isometric force is more elevated compared to the 1 RM, compared to the maximum load that I can actually lift. However, I can decelerate a load that is actually more elevated compared to my 1 RM and more elevated compared to my maximum isometric force. Okay, push, go ahead, please. So isometric is more than concentric and eccentric is more than isometric. The difference is about 10 to 15%. Go ahead. 10 to 15%. Okay, Hill curve. During an isometric test, basically what we get is this kind of curve. In the vertical x, there is force. In the horizontal x, there is time. And this is called force-time curve. Why this curve is really important? Because at the top, we have the maximum voluntary contraction. So the peak force. However, this is not the only parameter that can be analyzed, because we can also assess how steep is the force-time curve. Basically, how fast was the production of force by the individual. And this is actually the definition of explosive strength. So is the measurement of the force production in the early stage of the contraction. If the individual is able to recruit a lot of fast motor units, then the force-time curve is going to be really steep, really vertical. And in a few milliseconds, the subject will produce a high level of tension. This parameter is called rate of force development, and is actually very important to assess not only the quality of the individual, but also the condition of recovery. We will talk about that. So the dynamic parameter of strength are much more sensitive and influenced by the recovery status compared to maximal strength. Okay? Did you understand what is the rate of force development? Have you got any
Yeah.
question about that?
Explosive, you mean this is power, yeah?
No, it's not power. Because in order to have power, we need movement. Here,
Mm.
there is no movement. There is only an individual that is pushing or pulling a bar that cannot be moved. Okay. However, from an isometric contraction, we have some parameters, some measurement of explosive strength. Okay. So in the early stage, from 0.030 seconds to 0.15. Okay. Seconds. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so explosive strength, by this definition, is the production of force without movement. And here there is another force time curve with the rate of force development. That is actually how inclined is a portion of the curve, or the peak rate of force development, that is the segment of the first time curve with the highest inclination. Okay, and also peak force. Go ahead, please. No power, as I said, okay. But this kind of strength can also be measured during dynamic exercises. For example, if we put a force plate under the feet of an individual lifting weights, then we may have a force time curve. However, it's very interesting because the rate of force development produced during an isometric contraction is not correlated with the rate of force development that is produced during a dynamic contraction. There are some papers about that are very interesting, and we are doing a study about that. We are assessing jumps in different conditions and correlating the rate of force development measured in jumps in different conditions with the rate of force development measured during the mid-thigh pull. And there is no connection because probably the neural mechanism of motor unit recruitment are different when you are moving something or when you are not moving anything. And this is pretty interesting from my point of view. Okay, we will talk about that. Go ahead, please. Having maximal dynamic strength is very popular because every time you assess the 1RM in gym, and the 1RM is a parameter that is very important in order to find the proper load to work out on strength, is a measurement of maximal dynamic strength. Every time we lift a bar with the highest load that we can lift, the velocity is pretty low. Have you ever asked to yourself why? Why the speed is about 0.2 meters per second? Because in most of the exercises, the speed is close to 0.2 meters per second. In bench press, for example, if you are below 0.2 meters per second, it's very hard to complete the lift. Why during the 1RM the speed is so low? Okay, we analyze the difference.
Takes time to recruit the motor units.
Okay.
Takes time.
Yes.
Because we're close to the maximum isometric contraction.
Of course. So you need time to recruit all the motor units and to let them work together. This is the first answer. But why? Why, if the load is lower, then the speed is going to be more elevated? Why? Okay, there is a relationship between force and acceleration. Force equal to mass multiplied for acceleration, the first law of Newton. Okay, but there is another reason from a physiological point of view.
Maybe compensatory acceleration propulsion, CAP.
Because if I move this pen and throwing this pen in my apartment, only the recruitment of the fast fibers is enough to move the pen. But
when you lift maximal weight, you need both types of fibers, and
yes,
type 1 takes longer time to recruit. That's where we're going.
Kahneman's size principle.
Yes. And if I need to move something that is heavier, only fast fibers are not enough. So I need to recruit slower fibers, and then the result is going to be a slower movement. Okay. Okay. Very interesting. Go ahead. You have a lot of knowledge. I'm happy about that. So we can really go in depth. Okay, that was basically the 1RM. So go ahead. Go ahead. Velocity. Okay, so think about an example of how time is important to produce strength. If you try to do that movement without using the thumb, you are not able to do it. Why? Because if you use the thumb, then the parameter of time is not going to be important, because you have all the time to produce your force, recruiting all the muscle fibers, and then you release the thumb, and then you can produce force, because this time is 0.1 seconds, about 0.1 seconds, and is not enough to produce force without using the thumb. This example is reported in a book that is called Strength Training, Practical Aspects and the Theoretical Principle by Fletch and Kramer. It's a good book. Maybe you know, read it. Was published at the end of the 90s, I think, or in 2005. Okay, so force and speed are inversely.
Last version is from 2014.
14, the
Yes.
last edition.
Yes,
Nice. Do you have this book?
I'll send you the PDF later.
Oh, I have it. I have it. Don't worry. You are a hacker. I can tell you, but I have a lot of books, PDF. I try to read everything. So, okay, but as we see, there is an hyperbolic relation. Can you go to the previous slide? Okay, there is an hyperbolic relationship between force and velocity. But if we are, this is for a single muscle fiber, an isolated muscle fiber. But if we analyze the relationship between velocity and force in a real exercise, then the relationship is quite different and is more linear. And from this linear relationship, we can predict the 1RM based upon the velocity that an individual can obtain with two different loads. So we have the speed of the bar at two loads. We can build the graph, and then we can predict the 1RM, because when the 1RM is performed, usually the velocity is about 0.2 meters per second. Okay, so we can have a good approximation of the actual 1RM. Okay, go ahead. Nice, I'm happy because we are responding very well. And this is typically the force and speed relationship in another exercise, because the relationship is more linear, but there is another important factor that is actually power. Because when there is movement, when I'm moving the bar, if I divide the work for the time or the force for the speed, I can obtain the power. Usually the power is measured by devices such as accelerometers of Tendo unit. Have you ever used this kind of devices? Nice, good.
You can use, you have a technology to use verified technology. Using an iPhone, you can use the best training.
But you know, using the iPhone, we have some application. For example, for jump, there is My Jump. There are
yes, but you have for barbell tracking, it's called metric. It's reviewed. It's okay compared to the Tendo unit. Nadav is using
I think
something else.
I'm using Chrono Jump.
But okay, nice.
But you have a free app you can use if you have an iPhone. I have an Android, so I can't.
Yes, but if I ask you, what is the gold standard to measure power?
GymAware?
GymAware, no?
No. Allora, the gold standard is the three-dimensional
Oh,
analysis
Vicon.
with
Vicon and
Vicon.
Bikes.
Gennady Khizkiah used to use
BTS,
it.
stuff like that. At the beginning, the Tendo unit was validated with this procedure. Oh, you know
So
everything.
the apps are using validation from Tendo and stuff like that.
But the
Yeah.
apps is not, the validation is not great. The correlation is not
It's not great. It's not
Well,
perfect. Yes.
If I'm working with athletes, I won't count on it to measure actual velocity. It's not that great, and also the reliability of the apps is not great. So you can get some measurements that are not great, reliable to each other. So
Yes. And also, if you use accelerometers, the reliability is lower compared to encoder. So
Because
accelerometer,
it's
What is
a
it?
second derivative.
yes, but do you know what is a good application of accelerometers? And this is actually one of the future perspective. Basically, you put the accelerometer on the bar in every exercise that an individual is doing in the gym, every load, etc. And you collect all the data, and the artificial intelligence day by day analyze the data and suggest you what is the best option. We will talk about that. Okay, go ahead, please. Okay, linear relationship. Isometric force is more than dynamic 1RM. Okay, you have a lot of knowledge, so you know already that. In the right picture, you can see our lab, where we have a fixed bar that is connected to the ground, it cannot be moved, and the force plate. And we perform a lot of this assessment for bench press isometric evaluation. And now we did a prediction equation for the 1RM bench press based upon not only the isometric force, of course, we did that, but another parameter. You know what was the parameter? The thickness of the pec muscle measured by ultrasound. We tested more than 100 people, and finally we have now an equation, and it's going to be an interesting paper. I hope it's going to be published. Okay, so go ahead. There is another kind of force that is fast maximum dynamic strength, more than 0.3 seconds, and is very important for explosive lift, like jumps, squat jumps, etc. Okay, go ahead. What is the best way to assess the fast dynamic strength, or can also be defined as power in this case for the upper body? What is the gold standard for the upper body muscle? You can see by the picture that
It's
Ballistic movements.
bench press
it's
12.
in the
Bench
Smith
press
machine using a push.
Yes.
Bench press 12.
Bench press throw. Okay. This exercise lasts for more than 0.3 seconds. But what do you think? What is the best load to produce the peak of power? If you want to obtain the peak of power,
Around 30% of RM1.
30%.
from
32.
30,
I take 60.
from
60,
30
55.
to 60% usually, depending by the individual. Do you think it's better to release the bar or to keep the bar in your hand? What is the difference between?
Release.
Release.
Release to throw it.
What is the name of this kind
Ballistic.
Ballistic.
Ballistic
Ballistic.
of? Bravi. Good. Very good. Bravi in Italian means very good.
Bravo.
Sandro, but at most gyms, let's say even the Smith machine, you know, if there is no catchers, sometimes it might be difficult to
Yes.
assess it. But you know, we use it a lot, especially without measurement, but med balls and stuff that we can throw
Yes.
to the air. But the
But you know-
percentage, it's quite low.
Yes, but you
Because-
know, when you use a medicine ball throw, you have much more variables because the trajectory of the ball may vary, and it's not a good test to.
It's not a test. No, of course, it's not a test.
So can be used as a training, but as an assessment is not the best. The problem with the Smith machine is that they have like a sort of carabiner, so you have to move it and to fix it, And we did like that. I put like a screw in the Smith machine in my lab, and then we performed this kind of assessment. So with Dr.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yes, please.
Why to test it bilateral and not unilateral?
There is the Smith machine that was produced in the 80s for shot putter. That was actually a small Smith machine only for one arm, and was important for shot putter. And with this kind of devices, they were able to perform plyometric training. So basically, you decelerate the bar and then you explode, and you produce power. And then that was a very good way to train shot putter in Soviet Union.
There's
Okay.
gliders you can put on the rack, on the power rack, gliders, which are unilateral, and you can do whatever you want.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, nice. Go ahead. Okay, with or without elastic component, why there is the elastic component in the muscle? Why, if you stretch the muscle and then you contract in a concentric contraction, you produce more power compared to staying still and jumping from still
It's like-
Stretch reflex and the use of
Yeah.
Titan.
Oh,
Muscle spindles.
Yeah.
They use muscle spindles.
okay,
Stretch
so
shortening
there are two
cycle.
aspects. One is the stretch shortening reflex. So basically, neuromuscular spindle react to the elongation of the muscle by increasing the intensity of the contraction. Okay, this is the first principle. The second is within the structure of the sarcomere, because there are some protein like titin and nebulin that keep the different part of the sarcomere in the right position, and when they are stretched, they are able to give some additional force in the contraction. Okay, so
Like a
this is,
spring, like a recoil spring.
yes, like a spring. Nice. Okay, so go ahead. You know already that. So today's class was also to assess your knowledge. So, okay, go ahead. Explosive strength versus, okay. Another kind of strength is reactive strength, that is below 0.5 seconds of length, so very quick. A typical expression of this kind of strength is when a sprinter run, especially not in the first strides, but when he is in the top speed level. This kind of strength is also defined as stiffness. Why? Because the feet touch the ground really stiff, and the rebound is actually the production of reactive strength. Okay, go ahead. Bene, stiffness, it's very important for sprinters. Okay, go ahead.
I have a question.
Okay, let me know.
Stiffness is both neurological and architectural.
Yes, but especially is related to a strong muscle and a long tendon, especially in the calf of sprinter. So if you have a strong muscle, you have an isometric contraction that keep the tendon in tension. And when the feet touch the ground immediately, only the elasticity of the tendon and of the last portion of the muscle makes the rebound. So actually the muscle contraction is mostly isometric, and there is a rebound. Now the shoes that are used by sprinter are completely different compared to the 80s, because in the 80s, like Ben Johnson used to run with socks with spindles. Now they have a carbon fiber
Plate
under the shoe that increase this stiffness. So you are really stiff now. It's a sort of technological doping.
Also the surface is improved. We saw it in the surface, the track surface.
Yes, the track, yes, because
Yeah.
at the beginning, yes, under the track that was made by Sportflex, there were like some boxes that were vertical. So the rebound was mostly vertical. Now the boxes are oriented forward. So if you push, you have a rebound forward, and this may increase the ability to run fast. Okay, so there are several ways to assess the different component of strength. Why is important to assess the different component of strength? Because I can define if an individual is strong, the strong and the weakest point of an individual. For example, if I have a shot putter and is very strong in maximal strength, but is not powerful, then I should work more on power, maybe using lower weights compared to the loads close to the 1 rem. For example, in order to assess fast dynamic, maximal dynamic strength, fast, I may use counter movement jump or squat jump. What is the difference between counter movement jump and squat jump?
The stretch reflex.
They use of plyometric energy. They use of elastic energy.
Okay, very good. Do you think there is there a relationship between flexibility and elasticity of the muscle?
Not really.
Not really, no. Because elastic energy is the possibility to accumulate force during an eccentric contraction and to use the stored energy during the concentric contraction, while the flexibility is the possibility for an individual to perform a movement with a high range of motion. So there is no connection, even if some people believe that there is. Many athletes are not flexible, but they are very elastic. Okay. Bene, and the way to assess reactive strength, we may assess this component in drop jump. We ask to the individual to jump from a box of different height, and we measure the height of the jump and also the contact time. Okay, but we may also measure during sprint the contact time of the feet. Yes.
I heard the term modified RSI. Can you elaborate on that?
Modified?
There's RSI and modified RSI.
RSI, what is?
The
Reactive strength.
Ah, okay, modified. So modified.
Modified is using the counter movement jump, and the gold standard RSI is using the drop jump. That's the difference between the two tests.
Ah, okay. Yes. Maybe an option. Okay, go ahead. Okay, other way to train, not only assess, but training. For example, if you want to work on reactive strength on power of the lower body, what is the best, the most proper height of a box during drop jumps? How do you select the parameter?
Depends. You need to do a test to see if you have a contact mat or a post plate. You need to see the curve for which height is the most appropriate to produce the higher jump height. So it depends. Basically, literature is saying about 30 centimeters, but it depends. You can have an athlete that can from 50 centimeters, and some of them for 20. So it depends.
If I want to work on the power of the lower body, then the best way to assess to find the best height is to gradually increase the height and measure the height of the jump. This is the best parameter. However, if a sprinter wanna increase the level of reactive force, he may use an height that consent to reduce the contact time of the feet and to promote to optimize jump height. Okay, so the best equilibrium between contact time and jump height. Okay, go ahead, please. Bene, so here we have the 5 different kind of force in a graph, but we already discussed that, so we can go ahead. Okay, not all the exercises produce the peak of force in the same phase of the movement. For example, an exercise such as standing biceps curl with the barbell, at the beginning of the movement cannot produce the highest level of force. But the highest level of force is produced when the elbow is about 90 degrees. On the contrary, other exercises such as calf raises produce the highest amount of force at the beginning and then cannot produce such a high level of force. What about bench press? When bench press usually stop? When you are close to the 1RM? When you are almost done with the movement, or at the beginning, or in the middle?
In the stretch.
Just a little bit over the chest.
Yes.
Just like 3 or 5 centimeters over.
Yes, this point is called sticking point, and sticking point is defined as the moment, the phase of the lift in which the speed is the lowest of the entire speed. How can I improve the force produced at this specific phase of the movement?
You can move
Isometrics.
in the angles. Like
what do you suggest? What kind of training? If I want to work on this specific phase?
Deceleration.
Partial isometrics.
Eccentric, like decelerate
Yes.
and stop.
Yes, but in particular, partial and the isometric. Isometric. Why isometric? Because the improvement of force using isometric exercises is typically elevated at a specific angle. So if I work at 90 degrees, the increase of force is mostly at this specific angle. So in order to improve the force at the sticking point, may be useful to perform isometric contraction at this specific angle. What about deadlift? Is there a sticking point in deadlift?
At the beginning of the lift?
Nope. In deadlift,
it depends.
typically...
Some people can't lock out, and some people can't release from the ground.
But typically is in correspondence of the knee, the sticking point of deadlift. Of course, some individual may not be able to lift the bar from the ground, of course. And this is the reason why mid-thigh pull, the isometric test that we just see, is sometimes performed at the level of the knees. This test is very important for power lifters because the amount of load that an individual can lift is the load that can be lifted at the weakest point. So increasing the force at the weakest point may induce an increase in the total load lift. Okay, go ahead.
How many seconds for isometric contraction is typically preferred to do it in the training? Like 10 seconds, 12 seconds?
Okay, so there are different kinds of isometric training. Typically, in order to stimulate neuromuscular activation, a few seconds, less than 6, with maximum intent. Sometimes isometric contraction are used with lower weights, lower force produced, but that last longer in order to stimulate, for example, muscle hypertrophy. And think about, in the 80s, the scientists did not believe that with isometric contraction you could stimulate muscle hypertrophy. Now we know that especially in specific angle, you can stimulate muscle hypertrophy with isometric contraction.
Last question. It is true that isometric contraction is less damage the muscles. You can in fatigue oriented.
It's an interesting question. It depends how long is the muscle during the isometric contraction. For example, if I want to work on biceps and I work at 90 degrees, like here, now I'm not gonna experience a lot of muscle damage. However, if I want to work on the biceps and I work like that with the kettlebell, for example, at this point, I may experience a lot of muscle damage. That is very interesting.
Thank you.
Yes, because it's really depends. So now we built in our lab a new bench press for isometric evaluation and contraction that consent to work and to measure the force that you are producing when the muscle is stretched, when the pack is very long, and when the pack is short. And now, in the next month, we will start to assess the recovery process following isometric training at long muscle length and when the muscle is short. And what I expected is a big difference in that. So the inflammation, the change in muscle architecture is going to be much more elevated when the muscle work in when is very long. Okay. Okay, what about strength and body mass? There are some animals that are able to lift 1,000 times their body mass, such as the beetle. However, you can smash them because actually they are small. So there is a force relative to the body mass and absolute force. So the elephant is really force in absolute term, while the beetle is force only in relation to his body mass. And also the human being respects this principle, because, for example, when you have to lift your body mass, such as gymnasts, I don't know if you know that this athlete, Yuri Keki, was an Italian athlete that won twice the Olympics, was called the Lord of the Ring, was very strong in the rings. He was very strong compared to his body mass. He was about 58 kilos. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, yes. Bill Katzmaier, that was one of the first strongmen, was about 155 kilos. Was probably the first man to lift 300 kilos in bench press, and without the powerlifting technique, with a flat technique. So it was a beast, really a beast. He was very strong, but also very heavy. So the relative force compared to Yuri Keki, the gymnast, was probably lower, but in absolute term, there is no comparison, like the elephant and the beetle. Okay, go ahead. When you are a small individual, it's easier for you to have an high level of relative force compared to a big individual. However, in some specialty, it's important not only relative force, but relative power. For example, if I'm very powerful and fast in the lower body, but I'm 120 kilos, probably my time in 100-meter dash is not going to be so good. However, if I have the same characteristics of the lower body and I'm 70 kilos, I will probably run faster. Okay, relative force and relative power. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. You know already that. Okay, force can also be expressed. Go ahead, please. In relation to muscle mass, of course. So force divided for your body mass, but also from the muscle cross-sectional area. How can I measure the cross-sectional area of the muscle? What do you think?
MRI.
MRI, of course.
Ultrasound.
Ultrasound. But in order to calculate the cross-sectional area of the muscle, I need a specific kind of ultrasound, because a simple image collected by ultrasound is not able to measure. So you cannot use this image to calculate the cross-sectional area. You can only measure muscle thickness. In order to be able to measure muscle cross-sectional area, you need a function that is called panoramic view. in which the ultrasound device put together several images and build the entire muscle. Then, with a specific program, we will see that you can calculate the cross-sectional area. There is a relationship, linear relationship between cross-sectional area and the force. Why? Because the muscle is able to produce about 40 Newton per each square centimeter of cross-sectional area. Okay, since you increase the size of the muscle, then also the force is going to be improved. Go ahead, please. Okay, again. Okay. So when the performance of force is protracted for times, then we can talk about muscle endurance. Is the ability of the neuromuscular system to maintain a high level of force for time. It can be isometric or concentric, eccentric. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, please. Okay, now I would like to introduce the main principles of training. What this, where this knowledge come from? Because, go ahead, please. Okay, what is the training theory? The class I'm teaching in Italy, it's called Training Theory and Methodology. And the training theory, the knowledge that are explained by training theory, put together the knowledge coming from the lab all over the world, so sports science, and also training practice. The goal of the training theory is to find and use, develop better training methodologies. Go ahead. So the goal of the training theory is finding new training methodologies. Why I'm saying that? Because sometimes science is very far from the field, and there are no application or only a few application of what is discovered in the lab around the world about sports science. What is very important in my mind is to find some application of the scientific knowledge. Go ahead. One of the most important principles of training is specificity. While the first phases following exercise are not specific, because inflammation is not specific. So if I run downhill a mountain, or if I do a damaging protocol of squat in the gym, the first phase may be the same, inflammation. So inflammation is not specific. However, adaptation is specific. Go ahead. Adaptation is specific. Go ahead. So adaptation depends by the muscle groups that are involved in the exercises. If a muscle group is not involved in an exercises, then is not going to experience adaptation. But also training intensity, metabolic demands, joint angle. We said before that if I work in isometric contraction in a specific angle, then the increase in force is going to be more elevated at this specific angle. So adaptation is specific. In order to obtain some change in performance, we need to work on the specific performance. Go ahead. Overload principle. In order to stimulate adaptation, we need to overcome a certain level of intensity, volume, the parameters of training. If the intensity or volume of training is below a certain threshold, then the adaptation is not going to be optimal. Okay, go ahead. Okay, volume. Progression. You know the story of Milo of Croton? You know already? So
Yeah,
was
of
a
course.
guy from Calabria, that is a place in the south of Italy, and was a champion, and he used to lift a calf every day. The calf increases size and body mass, and he was still able to lift it. Okay, so at that time, they already know some of the principle probably of training. We will talk about that. We will talk about the first programs in the history of humankind from ancient Greece. Go ahead. For example, this picture, Vasily Alexeyev, he say that I train in the morning, during the night, in the gym, on the beach, but I never repeat myself. So variability of training is really important. So change the contents of training is really important, because if you don't change the content, then the body is not going to be adapted again. Think about elite athletes never repeat twice the same exercise protocol, the same exercise session. They always change something, like Vasily Alexeyev. Okay, go ahead. Individualization is really important based upon your level of fitness, genetic factors, gender. Why gender? Do you think women should train in a different way compared to men?
Some principle yes, some principle no.
Okay, what from what
We have
view? Yes.
we have
Yeah.
to take into account the menstrual cycle. Also, from my experience, women are better tolerable to load. They can tolerate volume more than
Yes.
men.
That is
And also
correct.
the relative strength for their body weight is different. So we have to adjust for that.
Yes, very interesting. What about the inflammation process? Is similar, is the same in male compared to woman?
I believe it, yes.
It's similar, but is for some aspects is really different. Think about men have typically more fast fibers. Fast fibers are more involved in muscle damage, and women have a high level of hormones, female hormones, progestinic, that reduce the inflammation. So basically, in men, when you have a muscle damage, you may have a second wave of inflammation that is reduced by estrogens in women. So the inflammation process.
The joke is that men feel pain more than women. This is the joke, yeah. That's why.
Maybe yes, but the inflammation and the adaptation is different. Following resistance exercise, we will talk about that. But individualization is a very important principle of training. Okay, go ahead. So if you take a look at the difference in the body of the athletes participating in the Olympics, you can understand how different is the training, but also how different is the genetic background. So their body is completely different. A challenge now is to find the right training for each individual. And this is quite new, because in the 80s, in the 90s, the athlete should adapt to the training session, to the training program. Now the perspective is completely different. It's the coach that should change the training program in order to adapt more to the athlete. We will talk about that. Go ahead. Reversibility. This is very sad, because when you get some adaptation, you may lose this adaptation really fast when the stimulus is reduced or there is not anymore. It's really sad, because muscle atrophy is faster than muscle hypertrophy, especially if the nutrition is not proper. Okay, go ahead. The continuity. Ronnie Coleman was still working out when he got
lightweight, baby, lightweight.
Lightweight, 13 times surgery in the hips. Poor little guy, but he was still working out, because inactivity is really bad, as we said at the beginning of the class. So even if you are injured, I always suggest to my athletes to work out and do what they could do, of course, what they can do without have pain okay. But it's very important to keep working, because exercise is very important to reduce chronic inflammation and to reduce also muscle atrophy. Okay, so continuity of the training program. Go ahead. Okay, that was the last for the principles, the general principles of training. We may stop for a few minutes and then we can start again. Do you have any questions about the first part? Okay. Alberto, do you have any questions about the first part of the class? So basically what you should remember forever is the different kind of strength, how to assess them, but we will discuss more about that. What is the relationship between force and velocity? How maximal strength is related to velocity, and how maximal strength is different when the contraction is isometric, eccentric, or concentric. What are the main principles of training? Because every time we will discover new experts or new methodologies of strength, in a lot of periodization model, for example, these principles are still valid. The individualization, the continuity of the training process, the progression of the loads are principles that are worldwide valid. Okay, now I would like to define some new concepts, such as general training. For example, many athletes perform bench press. However, this movement is not specific for a lot of sports. In NBA, a lot of players, I'm sure that they train the chest muscle using bench press. However, in their specialty, in their sport, bench press is not specific. So why they use this kind of exercise? What do you think?
To build muscles.
Yes, to strengthen the shoulders muscle, to make the shoulder more stable, and also because in order to have a certain level of explosive strength, you need to reach a threshold of maximum force. So it's really hard to be powerful without being enough strong. Okay, so in order to be powerful, you need to have enough strength. That is very important. So strength, support, power. Okay, so general training, the exercises that are performed in this portion of training are not immediately related to performance. However, they may be important. If we want to define the sport-specific training, you can go ahead. Sport-specific training has more connection with the actual specialty. For example, bench press throw is a sport-specific exercise for shot putter, even if there are many differences, but the type of muscle contractions have some similarities. Do you know the name of this athlete? Was a name from the 70s, Ricky Brook. There is a movie about him. Was a huge guy that did his personal best in discus throw, more than 71 meters at 41 years old. So basically the movie is the history of his training for 14 months at 41 years old. And at that time, in the 70s, like doping was actually not banned. So in the movie, there is everything, it's crazy. And is a typical example of roid rage. So basically, he was crazy. He was also a poet. So he was a crazy man. The title of the movie is The Soul is Bigger Than Word. If you want to see it, it's on YouTube. And you can see also some sport-specific training for discus throw, not only bench press. For example, the typical exercise, sport-specific exercise for discus thrower is flies with dumbbells. So basically, you lay down on a horizontal bench and you open your arms with the dumbbells until the pec is completely stretched and with the elbow completely extended. It's a tough exercise. And some of the discus thrower I was working out with performed this exercise with 22 kilogram dumbbells in each hand. So they were really strong. But you know, in order to throw very far, you need to be very strong because force support power. Even if the discus is only 2 kilograms, the leverage makes the technique really tough because your arm is completely extended. There is no one shot putter that goes to the Olympics that cannot lift at least 200 kilos in bench press. No one. Okay, go ahead. So general training, sport-specific training, and spatial strength training. That was defined at the beginning by Verkhoshansky in 1979. And he pushed a lot on spatial strength training. Basically, spatial strength training is the actually technique that is performed in competition with something different. For example, throwing an hammer that is heavier compared to the one that is used in competition. For example, the hammer with 10 kilos weight. This is called spatial strength training. Go ahead. An example for a sprinter, Usain Bolt, general training may be represented by leg press. So there is a big difference from sprint compared to the leg press. Sport specific may be represented by squat jump because there is a similarity in the kind of muscle contraction that is explosive, fast. Spatial training may be represented by sledge pulling that is actually sprint with something else that makes sprint more taxing for strength. Okay, do you understand that? So we have another definition. Go ahead. Okay, but how can we define the training load, or how can we measure the training load in endurance training? What are the parameters of the training load? Because when we say, okay, this period of training, this mesocycle, for example, has a very elevated volume. What is the parameter of training volume for endurance training, for example?
Mileage.
Mileage, time.
Go ahead.
Mileage, intensity, and you can intensity by or velocity or heart rate or RPE.
Yes, but there is a big difference
Heart
between
rate is internal.
velocity and heart rate. Go ahead, please. Okay, so volume is represented by the distance run or cumulative elevation gain. For example, today I did the run and I climbed the mountain of 4,000 meters, starting at 2,000 meters. 2,000 meters of gain in elevation is maybe a parameter of training volume. Intensity may be measured with the speed, for example. or with watt, because now a lot of cyclists, for example, use the watt to measure the training load. Okay, go ahead. Yes,
you can measure volume also by time. Not accurate,
yes,
but it's good.
yes, duration of the training session is a parameter of volume. Okay. What about the difference between external and internal load? Because in the previous parameter, we didn't have any physiological measurement. Internal load is related to some physiological assessment. The most simple is heart rate. Heart rate gives some information about the internal load, but also lactate accumulation, muscle excitation with measure with EMG. Give a lot of information about the internal load. There is another aspect of load that is actually the perceived load. So what is your perception of load? That is both related to external and internal load. The internal load may be different with the same external load in different situations. Think about now I'm really trained for running, and the same pace induce less elevation in heart rate compared to the same individual when is not trained. Okay, so RP, but there are also other scales than RP. For example, in order to assess muscle soreness, we use a lot the visual analog scale. So basically is represented by a line of 10 centimeters in which the individual draw a line and you measure the distance between the origin of the line. And this is a validated way to assess muscle soreness. Okay, go ahead. So we define the parameter for training load in endurance. So what about resistance training? The volume can be defined as the total kilogram that are lifted in every training session, the number of repetition, but how can I compare two individuals with different level of maximal strength? Because if I compare only the load lifted, of course, the individual that is stronger can lift much more in
per body weight. Then you can do it by per body weight, and then you know how much he lifted. If he lift 10 times per body weight, total volume, so it's the same like big and small men.
But think about one individual is very fat and the other one is pretty lean. So how can I
percent of 1 RM? Percent of
1 RM. So I can multiply the number of repetition per the percentage of 1 RM that is actually used in each exercise. And in this way, I can compare different individuals. However, while the volume was calculated as kilogram or number of repetition, then the unity of measure, what is going to be? An arbitrary unit. So it's not anymore kilogram or it's something else. It's an arbitrary unit. Okay, go ahead. Intensity can be measured by the percentage of 1 RM. However, I can lift the same percentage of 1 RM if it's submaximal, like 60% of 1 RM, with maximum explosive intent or slower. And actually, the intensity is different because the production of force is much more elevated with the full explosive intent compared to when I lift the bar slower. Do you know some exercises, some methodology that require a voluntary reduction in the speed of the movement?
What?
Tempo unit, tempo work from bodybuilders mainly.
But also like regular squat, because in the squat you have to deaccelerate when you're reaching to the top, because if not, you're going to jump. And if you're doing squat with 150, you can't really jump with your 1 RM repetition. So you have to decelerate the weight at the top different, like when you compare it to the Olympic lifting derivatives, like snatch or clean and jerk.
Nice. But what do you think? What is the purpose of this kind of training for bodybuilders? So super slow, like 10 seconds for the eccentric phase and 10 seconds for the
Increasing
concentric
time under
phase.
tension.
Increase the time under tension. So it's a parameter of volume or intensity?
Intensity.
Volume.
Effort.
Effort?
Both.
Because
Effort, of course,
intensity,
but effort
intensity,
is perceived exertion. So perceived exertion, of course, it's much more when you reduce the speed of the bar and you increase the time under tension. I think it's more.
If you spoke about the movement of the speed, so when I let's say manipulate with the tempo, so it might affect the intensity. So I might take, let's say, moderate weight, but if I move it very slow, the intensity will go up.
Yes, but the intensity is related to the percentage of 1 RM and to movement speed. So if the movement speed is pretty low, I think it's more related to volume, because the volume can be also quantified by the seconds of muscle contraction. So with the same intensity, because the load is not actually very elevated, if you reduce the speed, then it's more related to volume. In fact, what you want to increase is the metabolic stress of the training. That is usually related more to volume compared to intensity, because intensity is more related to mechanical stress. We will talk a lot about that. Go ahead. Density is the ratio between training and recovery. So basically, the kilogram lifted and the length of the training session, for example. Now, some parameters of perceived exertion are applied to the entire training session, and it's called the training load, usually. And 30 minutes following the resistance training session, you ask to the individual, how tough, how hard was the training session? And the subject give a number between 0 and 10. This number is multiplied for the length of the training session in minutes, and this is called the training load or session load. And what is really interesting is that this parameter is related both to training volume and to training intensity. We will talk about that when we will discuss about block periodization. Bene, also there are other characteristics of the exercises that are important. For example, time under tension, as we said, range of motion, speed. Go ahead. Go ahead. Set to failure. Because now there is a big debate about the need to go to failure in every set of a resistance exercise, or to stop with some repetition in reserve. What is repetition in reserve? This parameter means that I could complete 10 repetitions with a certain load, maybe 70% of 1 RM, but I stop the exercise when I reach 8 repetitions. If I have 2 repetitions in the tank, then this is called repetition in reserve 2. Okay, what do you think about set to failure? The literature say that with the set to failure, you increase mainly the metabolic stress of the exercise. You can induce more increases in hypertrophy, probably. However, the research
recovery is tough. It's tough.
Sorry?
The recovery is tough.
It's really tough, because when you reach failure, then the recovery process is going to be impaired and longer. In fact, when the goal is to increase maximal strength, maybe better to keep some repetition in reserve. Okay, so when the goal is maximal neuromuscular activation, it's better to keep some repetition in the tank. However, we have to keep in mind that this may be a variable, another variable of resistance exercise. So it's not enough to say, okay, a certain number of repetition, a certain number of set. No, set to failure. What is the load? How to prescribe a proper load in a resistance exercise? We can use 1 repetition maximum. However, this parameter may change, or when the subject during the training session is fatigued, then the level of force that he can produce is lower. Now, the repetition in reserve method is more popular because the load can be adapted across the training session in order to keep that level of effort. Okay, go ahead. Range of motion. We can work with partial or full range of motion, and this is another parameter that we have to keep in mind. So with full range of motion, there is a greater load displacement. So at the end, the volume of training may be more elevated. However, when we work with partial ROM, range of motion, we may increase the metabolic stress because we can reduce the blood flow to the muscle, for example, avoiding the phases of the dead phases of the exercise. For example, if we want to work in partial range of motion doing bicep curl, what portions of the movement you will delete?
You would like to do it in the longer muscle lengths, not in the shorter muscle lengths. So just the repetition when you stretch it and when you're coming to the 90-degree.
But in what position? Standing or in another position?
The position that will make you more stretch the muscle. So if it will down, it will be more stretch to the muscle.
Because if I work on bicep from this position with the arm that is horizontal, of course I can work from here to here. But if I stand up and I perform this exercise, then avoiding the last phases of range of motion when the elbow is completely extended may be more proper to induce more metabolic stress. Why? When the muscle is completely what happened? Sorry. Okay, when the muscle is completely stretched, the blood is coming. So if you avoid this phase by reducing the range of motion, and you move basically from here to here, there is no way for the blood to come. And you work in a hypoxia condition compared to this condition. In this condition, the muscle is relaxing and the blood is coming. So if you want to work with partial ROM when you stand up, the best way is from here to here, avoiding the last phase. However, as we said before, when the muscle is stretched, then the muscle damage is more elevated. So if you change the position of the arm from this position, then partial ROM may be from here and here, and may be properly executed. Okay, do you have any question about that? Or partial range of motion may also allow to use heavier loads, because with partial